Why was the night so quiet, when every instinct in her body screamed it shouldn't be? The desert wind scraped across the broken metal of an abandoned outpost, rattling loose wires like chimes. Boots pressed into sand made no sound. Even the air felt heavy, as if the silence itself carried weight. They were deep in hostile territory, further than their maps wanted to admit. 6 of them moved in a loose, staggered line, eyes scanning, rifles angled, but every head turned now and then toward her. She walked at the center, helmet shadowing eyes that didn't miss details. To anyone else she was another operator, same gear, same dust, same mud on boots. But there was something different in the way she carried silence, a stillness too precise to be accidental. Her call sign was echo. The irony wasn't lost on her. She rarely spoke. When she did, people listened. Tonight, though, her voice was waiting. The mission briefing had been simple on paper. Intercept. Intelligence suggested an enemy convoy would cross a dry riverbed, carrying components no one wanted in the wrong hands. A strike team would move in, capture, and extract. Except the simplicity of paper never matched the ground. They'd been out here longer than expected, moving through shadows where no one was supposed to live. The sun had gone, the cold had come, and every sound carried like glass breaking. She adjusted the earpiece beneath her helmet. Static hummed. Her thumb tapped the push-to-talk button without pressing, a nervous tick she hated but couldn't kill. She remembered the words from the commander hours earlier. Your lead comms tonight, Echo. If it falls apart, your voice keeps them alive. The weight of that responsibility pressed harder than the rifle across her chest. She hadn't asked for it. She never did. Yet somehow, again and again, it fell to her. Why? Because in moments when men twice her size cracked under pressure, her voice never shook. But tonight, something in the air was different. Even she felt it. A voice crackled over the net, clear left. Another answered, right clear. Silence swallowed them again. Her eyes swept the horizon. The moon hung half-hidden behind a veil of sand, casting shadows that shifted when nothing moved. She tightened her grip on the rifle. Not shadows, shapes. Her heartbeat slowed. 1-2 measured, controlled. Years of training pressed against the rising tide of instinct. Don't run with fear, sit with it, control it, let it sharpen. But she wasn't just afraid for herself. She turned her head slightly, seeing Torres on point, young, barely 24, pretending his shoulders weren't shaking under 70 pounds of gear. Malik trailed rear guard, a man who never spoke about the family photo taped inside his vest but touched it each night. And there was Mason, the oldest, who carried more regrets than ammo but moved like this mission might redeem him. She knew their stories, not all but enough to feel their weight. That's what made fear heavier, not dying herself, failing them. Her lips parted then closed again. She could warn them, say what her gut screamed, but words had power. Words shifted outcomes. Once spoken, there was no taking them back. So she stayed quiet. For now. The convoy wasn't late, it was gone, or rerouted, or worse. This entire mission was bait. She couldn't prove it, couldn't voice it, not without evidence. All she had was silence pressing harder against her chest. The team dropped into the riverbed, weapons raised. Sand crunched beneath boots, carried on the comms like thunder. One by one they spread out, scanning with optics, searching for tire tracks. Nothing. No recent passage, no sign of movement. Torres broke the quiet. We missed it. She almost corrected him, almost said no, it missed us. But the word stayed lodged in her throat. Then came the sound. So faint she thought at first it was her imagination, the click of metal, not close, not far, just enough. Her eyes snapped toward the ridgeline. A silhouette moved where shadows shouldn't. She blinked, but the shape stayed. Another joined it, then another. Her blood chilled. They weren't alone. She pressed her lips to the mic, hovered, waited, because once she whispered, everything would change. Her mind flickered back to another night. A younger version of herself, a different operation, the voice of a man she trusted telling her, Sometimes you speak too soon and it costs lives. That mistake had haunted her ever since. She wasn't going to repeat it. Her jaw clenched, her thumb hovered, the seconds stretched thin, fragile. Torres looked back at her, eyes wide, silently asking, "What now?" And in that moment she realized fear had already closed in on them. The team didn't need more silence. They needed something else. Her whisper cut through the static. "Contact High Ridge, east, eyes up now." The shift was instant. 6 rifles snapped in unison, scopes catching movement, laser dots painting shadows. The ridge came alive, dark figures, rifles braced, caught by her warning. Gunfire broke the night. The ambush had begun. But the team wasn't caught sleeping, because she spoke. Because her voice cut through fear. She dropped behind a slab of rock, heart pounding not from bullets but from relief that she hadn't waited a second longer. Bullets cracked overhead, dust exploding from stone. Mason swore, shouting coordinates. Malik fired short bursts. Torres froze, then remembered training and squeezed off rounds. Through the chaos, her whisper still hung in their ears. They weren't running blind, they had direction, they had a chance. But as she reloaded, her mind whispered another truth. This is only the beginning. And there was something she hadn't told them. Not yet. How long can a single second stretch when lives hang on its edge? The ridge was alive with muzzle flashes. Bright bursts cracked against the night, each one cutting into the black sky like lightning. She pressed tighter against the rock, grit stinging her cheek as chips of stone rained down. The smell of burned powder filled the air, carried in sharp waves by the cold desert wind. Her breath slowed even as her pulse thundered. Control it. Don't lose the rhythm, she counted. 2 heartbeats for an inhale, 3 for an exhale. It steadied her rifle, steadied her thoughts. Suppressing fire, North Ridge. Mason's voice tore through the comms, older, rough, steady. He rose, fired in measured bursts, then ducked back. Torres followed his lead, though his shots were erratic, the panic obvious in the scatter. "Torres, breathe," she hissed into the mic. Not an order, an anchor. He caught it, steadied, and his next volley landed where it should. Her eyes darted to Malik. The rear guard had gone prone, rifle braced, shooting with the calm of a man who had long ago decided how he'd die. Each shot he fired felt deliberate, necessary. She took her place among them, popped up, sighted a target, squeezed. A shadow on the ridge folded, dropped. She ducked before the return fire chewed the stone where her head had been. But the truth was clear, they were outnumbered. Whoever had set this ambush knew their path, their timing, their weakness. The convoy was never coming. This was the mission. Her chest tightened. She knew something no one else on this team did. Something she hadn't said at the briefing, hadn't whispered into the static. The intel wasn't just unreliable, it had been compromised. She thought of telling them, thought of breaking silence now, mid-firefight, but what would it do? Would they fight harder or break under the weight of betrayal? So she held it back, for now. "Echo, where do you want us?" Mason's voice cut in. The others turned to her instinctively. Even here, under fire, bullets snapping like whips, their eyes sought her direction. She hated that weight. She wore it anyway. "Shift south," she ordered, voice low, steady. "Ridge breaks near the dry wall, funnel them to the gap. Don't chase kills, control angles." They moved. Not perfectly, not clean, but enough. Torres stumbled, Malik dragged him up, Mason laid down fire. Together, they carved a line toward the crumbling edge of the riverbed wall. She covered them, rifle rising and falling with precision, each shot buying them inches. When the last of them reached the cover, she sprinted after, boots kicking sand, lungs burning. Bullets chased her, biting the ground, screaming past her ear. She slid behind the wall, heart hammering, alive. For a moment they breathed. 5 bodies pressed into dirt, rifles ready, adrenaline shaking through limbs. And then Torres broke the silence. "They knew," he said, voice cracking. "They knew we were coming." No one answered, but his words hung heavier than the night. She swallowed, her lips almost formed the truth. Yes, Torres, they knew, because someone on our side told them. Instead, she said, doesn't matter. What matters is we're still here. But inside, her silence burned. The firefight shifted. The enemy wasn't rushing. They were probing, testing angles, conserving ammo, professional, trained. Not the ragged fighters they'd faced before. These were hunters. And the team, they were prey holding out in a pit. Malik whispered over comms, "We can't hold here forever." She knew he was right. Her eyes scanned the horizon, searching for patterns in the dark. There, the faint glow of a signal light flickering 3 short, 3 long, 3 short. A signal, a trap marker. The ridge wasn't their only threat. More were coming, closing in. She pressed her back against the wall, shut her eyes for a breath. In the darkness behind her lids, she saw another face. Her brother, younger, laughing. The last night before he deployed, he hadn't come back. That was why she was here, why she wore the uniform, why silence was sometimes easier than speech. She was finishing what he couldn't, carrying what he left behind. But now she wondered, if he were here, would he already have told the truth to the team? Would he have carried the burden differently? A blast shook the ground. Dirt showered down, stinging her neck. RPG, close, too close. "Move," she shouted, no hesitation now. She broke cover first, firing as she ran, drawing eyes, drawing fire. The others followed. Mason cursed, Torres gasped, Malik's bursts kept heads down. They darted between broken stone, deeper into the labyrinth of the riverbed. Their boots echoed against the hollow ground, every step a gamble. Finally, breathless, they slid into the shadow of a collapsed bridge. Concrete and rebar arched above them like broken ribs. For the moment, it shielded them from view. In the silence that followed, broken only by the distant shouts of the hunters regrouping, Mason leaned close. His voice was low, too low for Torres or Malik to hear. "You knew, didn't you?" Her heart froze. He studied her, eyes sharp, not accusing, just knowing. "That's why you looked spooked before we dropped in. That's why you're carrying this heavier than the rest." Her jaw clenched. She wanted to deny it, wanted to brush it away. But Mason had seen too much in his life to be fooled by silence. Still, she whispered only, "Keep them steady. They need focus, not doubt." He nodded slowly. "You can't carry it alone forever, Echo." Maybe not, but for tonight she would. Shouts rose closer, footsteps in the sand. The hunters were spreading, tightening the noose. She closed her eyes, let the fear press in, let it weigh her chest, and then, like always, she cut through it. "Ready up," she whispered into the static. "We make our stand here, wait for my call." Her voice didn't shake. And in that silence between heartbeats, between gunfire and breath, the team believed again. But deep down she knew, belief might not be enough. Not tonight. Not with what was still coming. What do you hear first in moments when death leans close? The footsteps of the enemy, or the echo of your own past? She crouched under the fractured bridge, concrete pressing cold into her spine. The air was thick with dust, the smell of burned explosives still clinging. Above, voices barked commands in a language she didn't need translated. Tone alone carried intent. The hunters were tightening their net. Her rifle rested steady against her shoulder, but her mind wandered for a heartbeat. Just one. Back to another time, another night. A voice she couldn't forget. Her brother Daniel, laughing as he packed his gear the last time she saw him. "You ever think about it, Mara?" he'd said, zipping his bag with careless bravado. "How silence can save you. One wrong word, one loud breath gone. Silence keeps you alive." She hadn't answered then. She'd only watched him walk out the door, and he hadn't walked back. Silence hadn't saved him. Now here she was, carrying his lesson, his ghost, his absence. And still she wondered, had her own silence damned them tonight? Mason shifted beside her, reloading, muttering under his breath. A prayer, maybe. He never admitted to faith, but she heard it in his cadence. Torres sat with his back to the wall, breathing too fast, rifle clutched like a lifeline. Malik checked the corners, patient, precise, eyes scanning like radar. They were alive for now, but for now felt like sand slipping through fingers. Her comms hissed softly with static, empty channels, no reinforcements, no air support. They were ghosts in a place command had already written off. She should tell them the truth, that the intel was compromised before they left base, that she knew it in her gut, that this was no failed intercept, it was a setup. But if she spoke it now, what then? Panic, distrust, a fracture they couldn't afford. So she swallowed the confession and whispered something else instead. They'll come in waves, first to probe, then to crush. We survive the first wave, we buy time, that's the fight. It wasn't a lie, but it wasn't the whole truth either. Malik nodded. Torres looked steadier hearing it. Mason gave her that sharp side glance again but said nothing. He'd wait. He always did. The first shots cracked against the bridge, testing fire. Sparks danced from rebar, concrete dust burst. Shadows moved closer. She braced, breathed, whispered into comms. Mark targets, count your ammo, don't waste it, and when I say move, we move. The hunters advanced. Figures in the dark, disciplined, rifles cutting angles. They weren't rushing to die. They were patient, professional. The kind of enemy that didn't lose sleep over outnumbering you. Mara sighted down her scope. A face appeared between rubble. She squeezed. The figure dropped. Another filled the gap. She ducked back, chambered the next round. Gunfire erupted, deafening in the hollow pit. Echoes bounced, making it hard to tell direction. Torres fired too fast, too wild, until Mason's hand clamped his shoulder. Slow, breathe. Mara called the next shot. Left flank, shadow near the tire husk. Malik adjusted, fired once. The shadow collapsed. Her voice threaded through the chaos. Calm, clipped, precise, not commands, anchors. But inside, her stomach churned. Every trigger squeeze was just delaying the inevitable. They weren't winning ground. They were only buying breaths. And in that suspended breath, another memory intruded. Her first mission. She'd been the youngest in her unit, barely 22, still raw, still carrying the shine of someone who hadn't yet seen how war chews. They'd sent her on recon, just listening, just watching. She wanted to prove herself. And when she'd spoken too soon over comms, when her whisper had cracked with nerves, it had drawn fire onto her team. A man had died that night. She never forgot the look of his body lying still, or the way no one blamed her out loud, but all of them carried it in their eyes. From that night on, she'd promised herself, no wasted words, no noise unless necessary, silence until the moment it mattered. Tonight she wondered, had she gone too far the other way? Had her silence almost cost them again? A flash lit the night. Explosion tore the air, shaking the bridge, raining debris. Mason shielded Torres, dragging him out of the collapse. Malik swore, firing blind toward the source. Mara coughed, lungs burning with dust, ears ringing. She rolled, pressed her back against a slab of concrete and steadied her rifle. Through the ringing, through the chaos, she spoke. Calm, certain. Fall back, North Crawlspace, now. They obeyed, not because of rank, not because of orders, because her whisper carried weight. They crawled into the narrow space beneath the collapsed bridge, shadows swallowing them. The hunters advanced, unaware of their shift. From the dark, Mara watched boots pass feet away. She could hear their breath, smell the oil on their rifles. Torres trembled, rifle shaking. Mara pressed her hand gently against his arm, a silent message. Wait. The boots passed. The hunters moved forward, not knowing the prey had slipped behind. Mara whispered once more, now. The team rose as one, firing into their exposed backs. The hunters fell, shouts erupting, confusion spreading. For a moment, just a moment, they had the upper hand. Then more voices rose, more footsteps, the net tightening again. Mara's chest clenched. She knew this wouldn't end in triumph. This was survival, not victory, delay, not escape. Mason leaned close again, whispering under the roar. "Tell them, Echo, they deserve to know." Her throat tightened. She wanted to. She wanted to rip the silence apart, admit the betrayal, share the weight. But Torres looked at her with wide, terrified eyes. Malik kept scanning, steady, trusting. They didn't need the truth now. They needed hope. So she whispered instead, "We keep moving. Every second alive is a second stolen from them. Stay with me." And they did. But inside her, the silence was breaking. Because every step forward carried the shadow of what she still hadn't said. And the night was far from over. What holds you together when the world around you is tearing apart truth, or the illusion of it? The crawlspace spat them out into a hollow ravine, deeper, darker, where even moonlight struggled to follow. The sand here was damp from old floods, the air cooler, but the sense of being hunted clung thicker than the dust on their skin. They moved low, rifles up, every step measured. Mara led them by instinct more than map. She'd memorized the terrain for weeks, studied every fold of the land, but paper never carried the sound of footsteps chasing you. Behind her, Torres stumbled. His breathing was ragged, his nerves frayed thin. She didn't need to see his face to know his lips were trembling. He wasn't weak, he was young, young in the way that made war cruelest. She slowed enough for him to catch pace, close enough so he could hear her whisper through comms, meant for him alone. "One breath in, hold two out. That's your rhythm, copy." "Yes," he panted, but steadier now. He listened, he trusted. Ahead the ravine forked. Left narrow, uphill, exposed. Right wider but choked with wreckage from an old supply truck, long rusted, burned. She stopped, scanning both, ears straining for sound. Mason came up beside her. His face glistened with sweat, dirt streaked across his cheek, but his eyes were clear, sharp. "Which way?" he asked. She hesitated. Right carried cover but risked trap. Left was open, dangerous but faster. The hunters would expect them to take safety. She looked at Mason, then at Malik, who was already scanning angles with his rifle. Malik gave the smallest nod. He trusted her call. She whispered, "Left." They moved, quiet, quick, shadows against shadows. The incline bit into their legs, every step heavier than the last. Sweat pooled under armor, dripping into eyes. The silence was broken only by breath and the occasional scrape of boot on stone. Then voices, behind, below. The hunters had found the ravine. Torres froze. Mara spun, grabbed his vest, yanked him forward. "Move." Her whisper was sharp, commanding, not cruel, necessary. They crested the incline, lungs burning. The land flattened into a broken plateau, scattered with boulders and sparse brush, open enough to make them targets. Mara crouched low, scanning. No cover worth the name, only choices between bad and worse. Mason muttered, "Hell of a place to die." She shot him a look. He smirked, grim humor hiding the weight in his eyes. He wasn't joking. Malik pointed to the far edge, a depression shallow but usable. There. They sprinted, dove into the dip just as bullets whined past. Dust erupted around them. The hunters had the high ground now, pouring fire from the ridge they just escaped. Pinned again. Torres fired back wildly until Mara's hand steadied his barrel. "Aim, don't waste, trust your scope." He swallowed hard, adjusted, fired slower. Hit. She saw the silhouette fall. "Good," she whispered, "stay with me." But inside, her chest tightened. She couldn't keep holding this wall of silence. Not with every bullet a reminder that they were out here because someone had fed them lies, because she had known and hadn't stopped it. Mason pressed beside her, eyes never leaving his sights. His voice was low, but it cut through. "They deserve the truth, Echo." Her throat closed. Malik's voice joined, calm, steady, as he reloaded. "Whatever weight you're carrying, it's heavier if you carry it alone." She wanted to. God, she wanted to tell them. But Torres was right there, listening, shaking, barely clinging to courage. If she told him now that the mission was rotten from the start, would he break? A memory struck her, the night after Daniel's funeral. She stood in the kitchen with her mother, silence stretching between them like glass about to shatter. Her mother had finally said, "Sometimes silence isn't strength, Mara. Sometimes it's cowardice." She hated those words then, but tonight they pierced sharper than any bullet. Her comms hissed enemy chatter, faint but close. They were circling, closing. Time was bleeding out. She pressed her forehead to the dirt just for a breath, then lifted, exhaled, and whispered into the net. "They knew we were coming." The words hung, heavy, final. Torres froze mid-reload. What? Mason closed his eyes as if he'd been waiting for it. Malik's jaw tightened, but his hands never stopped working his rifle. Mara forced herself to keep going. The intel was compromised. This wasn't an intercept, it was bait. Silence followed. Not the silence of fear this time, but of betrayal settling into bones. Torres shook his head, denial raw in his voice. Why didn't you? Because if I told you before we dropped, half of you would have refused, and the mission would have collapsed before it began. Her voice broke for the first time, but only slightly, and I couldn't let that happen. Mason muttered, "Damn it, Echo." But his tone wasn't anger, it was weary understanding. Malik finally spoke, quiet but firm. "What matters is we're still breathing. Truth or lies, that's what we've got." The hunter's fire intensified. Bullets shredded brush, sparks flying from stone. The moment of confession ended. Survival reclaimed them. Mara rose, sighted fire, dropped one, her voice steadied again. "We hold them here, we bleed their time. Extraction, not coming, but dawn is. We make it to dawn, maybe we make it out." Torres was pale, but he nodded. He wasn't broken, not yet. Mason slapped a new mag into his rifle, muttering, "Then dawn it is." And Malik simply whispered, "Copy." Together they fought. The plateau lit with fire, the night ringing with thunder. Shadows rose and fell. Dust choked their lungs, heat seared their skin, fear clawed their guts. But they held. And through it all, Mara's whisper carried in their ears. Steady, certain, not fearless, never that, but anchored. For the first time that night she felt lighter. Not because the fight was easier, it wasn't, but because she had finally spoken. The silence had cracked. And sometimes, cracks let in just enough light to keep you standing. Still in the back of her mind, one thought lingered, cold and relentless. If the intel was compromised, who sold them out? That answer hadn't come yet. But it would. And when it did, she knew it would cut deeper than any bullet. She woke in darkness. Not the kind that simply came with nightfall, but the kind that pressed down on your chest and made you wonder if morning would ever come. The safe house walls were cracked concrete. The air smelled faintly of oil and dust. Outside, silence, too much of it. No roosters, no dogs, not even the restless shuffle of distant patrols. Silence this heavy was always a warning. She sat up slowly, rifle across her knees, the strap of her headset imprinting a faint red mark on her cheek. The others were scattered across the room, half asleep, half pretending. A soldier never really slept in a place like this. Why had she woken? A sound, a presence, or maybe it was just the weight of her own thoughts. She turned her head toward the radio. Static whispered faintly, like the memory of waves on a forgotten shore. She stared at it. That little black box had become the difference between life and death so many times already. And yet she hated it. Because every time she spoke into it, she felt the echo of her father's voice. A man who had once worn a headset like that in another war, another time, another failure. She had found his old letters once, folded neatly, words trembling with fear he had never shown in person. He'd fought, yes, but he had also doubted. And she was terrified of becoming him. But tonight wasn't about her fears. It was about the team. The quiet figure by the door shifted. Torres, still awake, always awake. His eyes met hers, and without a word he tilted his chin slightly. He'd heard it too. She raised her rifle, moved to the cracked window, peered into the night. At first nothing, then movement, not close, not loud, but deliberate. The weight of footsteps pressed into the earth, careful, controlled. Not villagers, not random passers-by. They were being surrounded. Her throat tightened, but she stayed still. The team needed to keep their calm. She tapped the radio, whispered into it, "We've got company." The words came softer than she intended, a breath more than a statement, but everyone in the room heard. Heads lifted, bodies stiffened. The silence broke, replaced with the familiar ritual of readiness, rifles checked, ammo counted, knives unsheathed. And then the waiting. Always the waiting. Minutes stretched. The footsteps outside shifted, faded, returned. The enemy was probing, testing their nerves. "Why aren't they hitting us yet?" someone whispered. No one answered. She knew why. They wanted fear to do the work first, wanted panic to set in before the first bullet flew. But fear was already here, and if she didn't move quickly, it would take them all. She leaned closer to the radio, closed her eyes, whispered one word. "Steady." The room froze. For a moment the word seemed to hang there, fragile like glass, but then it sank in. Shoulders loosened, breathing steadied. Fear didn't vanish, but it shifted, became focus. And for the first time that night, the silence felt like theirs. But silence never lasts long in war. The first shot cracked through the window. Glass shattered, plaster dust exploded into the air. Someone grunted, pulled back bleeding. Then the storm came, bullets ripping into walls, splinters flying, concrete chunks raining down. The safe house shook with violence, and yet through it all her whisper still echoed in their ears, "Steady." She pressed against the wall, firing short bursts, calculated, not wild, not wasteful, each shot placed with care. Torres covered the door. Reynolds dragged the wounded man back, blood streaking the floor. Another teammate screamed in anger, not pain, anger at the chaos, at the helplessness. And still she kept whispering, not commands, not strategy, just fragments. "Hold. Together. Not yet." The firefight went on, minutes that felt like lifetimes. And in the chaos she thought of her father again, of the words he never said, the doubts he carried. She wondered, did he ever whisper to his team the way she did now, or had he carried his silence until it consumed him? She didn't have an answer, and maybe she didn't want one. Because right now, her whisper wasn't just holding the team together, it was holding her together too. Finally the gunfire ebbed, not gone, just shifted, the enemy regrouping, waiting for the next push. In the lull she crawled to Reynolds. The wounded man was breathing, shallow but steady, a shot to the shoulder, painful but survivable if they got him out soon. "Extraction?" she asked. Reynolds shook his head. Radios jammed, no word from command. Of course it was. She sat back, breathing hard. Sweat stung her eyes. The air was thick with smoke and dust. Her lungs felt heavy, but her mind was sharper than it had ever been. Fear hadn't gone, but it wasn't in control anymore. The team looked at her, not because she was the highest rank, not because she was the loudest, but because she had whispered when fear had shouted. And that was enough. For now. Outside the footsteps came again, louder this time, more of them. The night wasn't over. And she knew neither was the test. How long could silence last before it broke you? That was the question hanging in the air, thick as the dust choking their lungs. The firefight had paused, but the safe house was no sanctuary. The walls were pockmarked, windows shattered, the floor littered with shell casings glinting in the pale moonlight that leaked through the cracks. The team huddled in the corners, weapons trained on shadows that seemed to shift with every breath. No one spoke. She pressed her back against the wall, listening. The footsteps outside had grown bolder, heavier. The enemy wasn't circling anymore, they were moving into position. And yet, they hadn't launched the final push. That hesitation unsettled her more than the gunfire ever could. Why were they waiting? She adjusted her grip on the rifle. Her palms were slick with sweat, though the night was cold. She breathed in slowly, letting the smell of cordite settle in her chest. Her headset buzzed faintly with static. No voices, no command, just her and the team cut off, waiting for a storm they couldn't see. "Why don't they finish it?" one of the younger soldiers whispered. His voice cracked, too loud in the small room. She turned toward him. His eyes darted wide, desperate. He wasn't asking about the enemy, he was asking about death. She didn't answer right away. Her silence made him hold her gaze, forced him to steady himself. Then finally she said it. "Because fear does more damage than bullets." The words dropped heavy. Some of the men shifted uncomfortably, but Torres nodded. He understood. Fear wasn't just the enemy outside, it was the enemy inside too. And right now she was fighting both. Her mind drifted, unwanted, back to her first deployment. She had been the new one then, the one whispering questions in the dark, wondering if she'd live to see dawn. She remembered how no one had looked at her, no one had answered her. She learned the hard way that silence was its own kind of cruelty. That memory cut through her chest like glass, and maybe that's why she whispered now, not for herself, but for them. She leaned closer, voice steady despite the tremor in her bones. "You're not alone, we're still here, together." The words weren't loud, but they spread like warmth in the freezing night. Then the sound came. Not gunfire, not shouting, something worse. "Engines." She froze, the others looked at her. They all heard it, the low, rumbling growl of vehicles approaching. Not one, not two, a convoy. Her heart dropped. They weren't just surrounded anymore. They were being swallowed whole. She forced herself to breathe, to think. Panic would finish them faster than the bullets waiting outside. "Positions," she whispered. The team obeyed, moving like shadows, silent and precise. They were exhausted, bloodied, but still soldiers. Through the shattered window she saw headlights cutting through the dark, dust rising, figures moving with purpose. This wasn't a raid, this was an execution. She raised her rifle, sighted in. But something stopped her. The man stepping out of the lead vehicle moved differently. Calm, unhurried, a commander. She couldn't see his face, but she felt his presence, heavy as the night itself. He raised a hand and the surrounding fighters froze. What was he waiting for? Her chest tightened. She had seen this before. Leaders like him didn't rush. They wanted control. They wanted fear to eat the enemy alive before the killing began. The team shifted nervously. One of them muttered, "We're dead." Her finger tightened on the trigger. Not yet. She lowered her rifle, not out of mercy, out of calculation. If she fired now, they'd all be erased in minutes. She needed another way. Her gaze flicked to the wounded man, lying pale and trembling in the corner. He didn't have hours. Extraction wasn't coming. She closed her eyes. For a moment she wanted to scream, wanted to curse command, curse fate, curse the war that had dragged her here, but she didn't. Instead, she whispered into the static. "Not tonight." The others turned, confused, desperate for meaning. "Not tonight," she repeated, louder this time. "We don't give them what they want. Fear doesn't win tonight." Torres' jaw clenched. He nodded, fire in his eyes. Reynolds checked his rifle, expression grim but steady. Even the youngest one, shaking, drew in a breath and held it like armor. She didn't know if they would survive. She didn't even know if she believed her own words. But in that moment, belief didn't matter. Only resolve did. The commander outside lifted his hand again. A signal. Fighters began to spread, moving toward the house. It was coming. She raised her rifle. The team mirrored her. For one long, eternal heartbeat, the world held still. The night air buzzed with static, engines growled low, boots scraped against stone. And then, her whisper broke the silence one last time. Now, gunfire erupted. The safe house lit up with muzzle flashes, thunder cracking inside concrete walls. Bullets tore through the night, through flesh, through steel. The convoy outside roared in chaos, fighters ducking, shouting. Her team fought like wolves cornered, every shot deliberate, every breath a choice between life and death. And she was the center, calm, cold, focused. Her whisper had lit the spark. Now fire raged. How long could human bodies resist the storm? That question no longer lingered in silence. It screamed in every gunshot, every ragged breath, every thud of a bullet tearing into walls that barely stood anymore. The safe house had become a coffin of dust and fire. The air was so thick with smoke that her lungs clawed for air with each breath. The floor was slick, blood, sweat, oil, she couldn't tell. Her eyes stung, her ears rang. And still she fought. The team moved like pieces of her own body, connected not by orders but by whispers. They didn't need shouting anymore, just a look, just a nod, just the calm steel in her eyes that said, "We're not done yet." Torres had taken a hit, not bad enough to pull him out, but his left arm hung uselessly at his side. Still, he anchored the doorway, firing single, precise shots, every round a denial of the enemy's advance. Reynolds was on his knees beside the wounded man, bandaging, cursing under his breath, but somehow still managing to reload with mechanical efficiency. The youngest, Ellis, was pale as ash, but his hands no longer trembled. He had crossed the line between fear and resolve. His eyes, wide but steady, tracked targets like he had been born for this night. And she had become silence itself, a silence that cut sharper than the bullets screaming around her. But even silence couldn't stop the truth creeping in. They weren't going to last. The enemy numbers didn't shrink. If anything, more shadows spilled from the vehicles, more boots pressed against the earth. It was a tide, and tides didn't stop because you stood firm. The thought sliced through her chest, but she didn't let it show, not yet. She crouched beside Torres, grabbed his good shoulder. "You with me?" He gritted his teeth, sweat dripping. "Always." She nodded once, and that was enough. The next push came like thunder. Grenades rattled the walls, plaster falling like snow. The room shook, the wounded man screamed, and for a heartbeat, it felt like the world collapsed. Ellis shouted something. She didn't hear what. Her ears rang, high and merciless. Her body moved on instinct, dragging Torres down as bullets ripped the doorway apart. She fired blind into the smoke. Heard someone fall, maybe enemy, maybe not. War didn't give answers. When the ringing dulled, she realized she was on the floor, cheek pressed against cold concrete. The radio lay inches from her face, its static whispering like a ghost. And for one moment, just one, she thought about letting it go. Letting fear win. Because wasn't this inevitable? Wasn't this what her father had known too? That no matter how hard you fought, no matter how steady your whispers were, the tide always came back. Her hand trembled toward the radio. Then she stopped. She saw Ellis, face smeared with dust, still firing through the shattered window. She saw Reynolds, hands soaked in blood but refusing to give up on the man who barely clung to life. She saw Torres, teeth bared, firing one-handed but still fighting like a man who would rather burn than bend. They weren't finished. And if they weren't finished, neither was she. Her fingers closed around the radio, and she whispered, "Hold." Her voice was hoarse, cracked, almost broken, but it carried. And her team answered without words. They held. Another wave crashed. Another eternity of bullets, shouts, explosions, and still they stood. But something inside her knew the truth. This wasn't about winning, not anymore. This was about lasting long enough. For what? Extraction, reinforcements, a miracle she didn't know, but she clung to the hope like a blade in the dark. The night stretched on, Minutes bled into hours. Every heartbeat felt stolen, borrowed from fate. At one point, the commander outside called out. His voice carried through the smoke, calm and cruel. "Give up, you have no escape." Ellis flinched, looking at her, waiting. She met his eyes, and for the first time that night, she let him see something more than steel. She let him see the fire beneath it. "We don't surrender." Her whisper cut through the night sharper than the commander's shout. The boy nodded, jaw set. He didn't need more. Gunfire erupted again. The fight became rhythm, pain, breath, fire, silence, again and again, like the night had no end. But bodies weren't made of stone. Reynolds's hand slowed. Torres' shots came less steady. Even Ellis's fire dulled as exhaustion weighed him down. And she felt it too. Every bone screamed, every thought blurred. But inside her, something burned brighter. Because she realized something her father hadn't. Fear wasn't meant to be defeated. It was meant to be carried, whispered through, survived with. She wasn't fighting to erase it. She was fighting to prove it didn't own her. And as long as she could still whisper, her team would know it didn't own them either. Another explosion rocked the building. The ceiling cracked. Dust poured down like rain. Reynolds shouted over the chaos, "We can't hold much longer." She met his eyes, then looked at the radio. Static still whispered, no voice, no command, no salvation. Unless... Her mind raced. If the enemy could jam signals, maybe the right frequency could cut through. She had studied long nights, practiced shifts no one else bothered with. She remembered. Her fingers spun the dial, slow, careful. Through the static came faint fragments, ghosts of voices. She pressed the headset to her ear, blocking the roar of battle, searching for one thin thread of hope. And then she heard it. Grid, repeat, grid compromised. Her heart jolted, command. She pressed the button, whispering so low it felt like prayer. "This is Hawk 2, safe house surrounded, coordinates." The words broke into static. She adjusted, tried again. "Team compromised, multiple wounded, holding position, request immediate." The line cut, silence. Her throat tightened, but she didn't stop. She whispered again, and again, and again. Every word carrying not just a command, but to her team, to herself, to the night that threatened to swallow them. "Hold. Together. Not tonight." And somehow, those whispers carried louder than the storm outside. The commander's voice came again, harsher now. "You cannot win. Surrender and live." Her team looked at her, waiting. She closed her eyes, and when she opened them, they burned. Her whisper was steady. "We live by holding. We die by surrender. You choose." No one spoke, but the answer was clear. The team raised their weapons. And the night prepared to break. Dawn didn't come gently. It bled across the horizon, a faint line of gray peeling back the night. Through the shattered walls of the safe house, the sky looked bruised, like the earth itself had been beaten by war. The team had survived the hours no one believed they could, but at what cost? The safe house was barely standing. Bullet holes pocked every wall, smoke hung like a veil, and the floor was slick with blood that refused to dry. Reynolds's hand shook as he tightened the last bandage on the wounded man, whose breathing was shallow, almost imperceptible. Torres leaned against the doorway, face pale, blood soaking through his uniform. Ellis sat slumped near the window, rifle across his lap, eyes sunken but still alert. They were alive, but only barely. And she felt every beat of her heart like a countdown. Her body screamed at her, muscles torn, ears ringing, lungs burning. She had given everything, and the night had taken more than she thought she had to give. But something inside her still whispered. Not words, not yet, just the echo of resolve carried from her father's silence, reshaped into her own voice. The radio crackled. It was faint at first, like a dream, then sharper, clearer. Copy Hawk 2, hold position, inbound. Her breath caught. Reynolds froze, eyes snapping toward her. Ellis sat up straighter. Even Torres' lips twitched into something almost like a smile. Extraction. The word hung in the air like salvation. But outside, the enemy hadn't vanished. They were still there. Engines idling, shadows shifting in the pale morning light. The commander hadn't moved all night. He stood by his vehicle, calm, waiting. And now, he knew time wasn't his friend anymore. Because reinforcements were coming. He lifted his hand, a final signal. The last push began. Dozens of boots pounded the earth, shouts rose, weapons thundered. The team braced. Ellis fired until his rifle clicked empty, then reloaded with trembling hands. Torres, pale as death, propped himself against the wall and unleashed a storm of defiance. Reynolds abandoned bandages for bullets, pulling his sidearm and firing into the rush. And she was everywhere at once, whispering, firing, pulling, steadying. Her voice cut through the chaos like a thread binding them together. Left side. Stay with me. Not yet. The walls shook, dust choked. The wounded man cried out, but they held. Still, the tide was too much. The enemy poured closer, overwhelming. Bullets punched into the safe house. Ellis screamed, falling back, blood blooming across his chest. Reynolds dragged him, shouting his name, but Ellis's eyes were already dimming. Torres' weapon clattered to the floor. He slumped, breath ragged, still whispering curses between gasps. Her chest caved with grief, but she didn't stop. Couldn't stop. She fired until her rifle emptied, then grabbed another. Every shot was a refusal, every whisper a promise. Together. The enemy breached the doorway. Chaos erupted inside. Hand to hand, desperate, brutal. She shoved, struck, clawed for every second. Reynolds fired point-blank, blood spraying the walls. But there were too many. And then she heard it. The distant roar of helicopters. Her heart lurched. Extraction, real, undeniable, coming closer. The enemy heard it too. Their rush faltered. The commander outside shouted orders, fury in his voice. But it was too late. The thundering blades grew louder, shaking the air, rattling the ground. Vehicles pulled back, fighters retreating. The commander hesitated, hand raised as if torn between pride and survival. Then he turned, climbing into his vehicle, swallowed by dust as his convoy peeled away. Just like that, silence returned. But it wasn't the silence of fear this time. It was the silence of survival. The helicopters descended, wind tearing through the ruins. Soldiers spilled out, sweeping the area, securing, shouting. Medics rushed in, grabbing Reynolds, Torres, Ellis's lifeless body. She stood there, rifle hanging limply at her side, eyes burning with exhaustion and grief. A medic reached for her arm. She pulled back. Not yet. She turned, looking at her team, what was left of them. Reynolds met her eyes, silent gratitude heavy in his stare. Torres, barely conscious, whispered something she couldn't hear, but she saw his lips form one word: steady. Ellis lay still. Her throat tightened. She looked at him, at the boy who had walked into this night afraid and left it carved into history. His rifle still rested across his lap. She reached down, touched it, whispered one last time. You didn't fail. The words weren't for him, not entirely. They were for herself. Because for years she had carried her father's silence, his unspoken doubts, his quiet surrender to fear. She had wondered if she was bound to the same fate. But tonight she had whispered. And her whisper had carried them through the storm. As dawn spread across the sky, painting the ruins in pale gold, she finally let the rifle slip from her hands. The weight of the night drained from her body, leaving only the quiet ache of survival. The medics pulled her toward the helicopter. She didn't resist this time. Inside, the roar of the blades drowned out the world. Reynolds leaned against her, eyes closed. Torres groaned, slipping into unconsciousness. The wounded man breathed shallowly, still clinging. She looked at them one last time before closing her eyes. And in that darkness, her father's silence returned. But this time she didn't fear it, because she had found her own answer. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply whispers. And sometimes that whisper is enough to change everything.